I was 20, living alone on the ground floor of an apartment building. My living room windows faced the small parking lot for the building, which was not gated. I'd stay up late every night watching TV or playing games almost every day. It was winter when I first moved in, so I'd have the blinds down at night to help keep the cold air out. Summer came and there was no AC in the apartment. I'd open the windows and blinds at night to let some cool air in. One night, I'm lying on the couch watching TV when I suddenly get the feeling of being watched. I looked over at the window, only to see a man with his hands and face pressed right against the screen, merely 3 feet from where I was laying, just watching me. I let out this blood-curdling scream, and he didn't even blink. Terrified, I jumped up, grabbed the phone, and screamed that I was calling the cops. He just stood there the whole time, though, completely motionless and dead-eyed. At that point, I yelled that I was getting the neighbor and started walking to the door. Then he finally took off. I locked the window and stayed up all night, completely on edge. My boyfriend at the time came over and stayed for a full week. He made sure to leave the blinds open and sat at the edge of the couch closest to the window to make it known I wasn't alone. The creeper didn't show up again, so eventually I got comfortable, thinking it was an isolated incident of some rando wandering around the parking lot to break into cars. Maybe another 3 weeks after that, though, I get home late from waiting tables and park in the lot. I get changed, grab a snack, and head to the living room to play some games. I start to raise the blinds to open the windows and let in the cool air, only to see the creeper standing right there already, with his face pressed right against the screen. He was not standing in the parking lot when I pulled in, as I parked right by my window. I can only assume he was waiting around the corner of the building, watching me come home and timing my movements. This time I grabbed the phone and immediately called the cops. I was shaking, crying, completely hysterical. The creeper took off running. The cops came and said they'd have someone patrol the block when they could. My boyfriend immediately came over. He wanted to stay with me until I could get out of there, so I started looking at different apartments. Another 3 or 4 weeks later or so, I finally have an apartment lined up on a high floor in a dorm building, because at this point, fuck all that. My boyfriend had to go out of town for a few days, so I decided to stay at my friend's place, because I certainly was not going to be staying there alone. I stayed at my friend's place for about 2 nights, but I had to run home to grab a few things I'd forgotten. She went with me for obvious reasons. We also went in the afternoon, and not after dark. We decided, though, to hang out for a bit and play games together, because it was daylight and there was a lot of activity around the building. Still no AC, so I hesitantly raised the blinds to let in some fresh air. I was completely terrified of opening them, but I laughed to myself and did it because, of course, no one would be there in the middle of the day. Well, I opened the actual window, only to see 2 giant holes cut into the screen, right above the latches you push in to lift it. They were definitely not there 2 days ago. My blood ran entirely cold. The creeper knew my boyfriend was gone. He was watching and saw his car was not there. I'd left my car there as my friend had picked me up, and we always left the light on in the living room to make the creeper think we were awake. This means he saw my car, thought I was home, saw the light on, and yet still proceeded to cut holes in the screen to break in. I have no idea if he actually gained access, but seeing how bold he was terrified me. How long had he been watching me, learning my patterns, getting gradually more aggressive with every interaction? I still sometimes get a chill when I raise my blinds. It took a long time getting comfortable living in anything but a high-rise. So thanks for the lifelong PTSD, I guess, creeper. This is my first time posting anything like this, so forgive me if this isn't the best explanation. This summer, I decided to pick up some graveyard shifts at my current full-time job, simply because it pays more, and I'm a university student drowning in student debt. Well, about 2 weeks ago, on the rare occasion that I get to sleep during the time the sun is actually down, at 3:30 to 4 a.m., I was suddenly awoken by an extremely loud sound. Me being half asleep already, I honestly had no idea what the sound could even be. I just chalked it up to being one of my neighbors dropping something, because I live in an apartment with very thin walls. I tried to get back to sleep. After about 10 minutes of laying there with my eyes closed, though, I began to hear the sound again. This time, though, I was already pretty much awake, so I recognized what the sound was immediately. Someone was knocking on my window. For context, I'm a single female living alone and in a basement suite, so my windows were basically level with the sidewalk. Anyways, I was obviously freaked out. I had no idea what the heck to do. I didn't want to move or make any noises because I didn't want them to know that I was home alone. I just sat there frozen, laying in this bed. Then I hear the knocking again. I instantly balled up as my fight or flight kicked in. I ran to the front door, which had my keys with my pepper spray on them. The keys clink together and make a noticeable noise. The knocking starts to get more intense and loud. This is when I realize the window with the screen by my bed is almost all the way open because my cat likes to sit on the edge. I forgot to close and lock it. I started to freak out, already having major anxiety. I started looking for my phone, just in case I'd need to call the police. Well, me being fucking clumsy and shaking from anxiety, I dropped the phone on the ground. Whoever was at my window proceeded to do what sounds like either sliding his fingernails or a really sharp object across the length of the screen. I realized this person's intentions were either to come in or to scare me. So, like a fucking idiot and not thinking, I ran to the window as fast as I could, slammed it shut, and locked it, while avoiding looking outside at whoever it was. The knocking finally stopped after a while. I waited about 30 more minutes without hearing any more knocking. I laid back down and went right back to sleep. The next morning, I honestly couldn't believe that it even happened to me. I started to think even that maybe it was just a dream. I went outside to investigate. I see an empty beer bottle and a ripped-up blanket. I text my only friend that knows where I live and asked them if they were fucking with me. They say no, which I figured, because they don't drive and live quite far away. The buses around my house also stopped running well before 3 a.m. I called my landlord and told him what had happened, and he told me to just ignore it, as this had happened several times before. Well, that's fucking creepy. Anyways, I obviously recognize now I should have done a lot of things differently and called the police right away. It hasn't happened since, thankfully, but nonetheless, it was super terrifying. But I can't exactly afford to move again. I told this story to a friend recently and they seemed genuinely surprised. I guess I just thought that something similar happens to everyone. They suggested sharing my story, so this seemed like a fitting place. It was the summer of '98 in the hot California desert. I was 5 years old riding shotgun in my mom's crappy little convertible. It barely ran, but the seats were red velvet, the radio worked, and being able to take the top down almost made up for the lack of air conditioning. My days were normally spent at daycare or the babysitters, as my single student mom had to put in long hours at her job just to provide for us. I didn't mind though. It just meant that days like today were even more special. My mom was driving me across to the next county to my cousin's house for a birthday party that was going to be complete with dress-up games and even an ice cream cake. To truly seal the deal, she had taken us to McDonald's right before we headed out on our drive, too. I got a Happy Meal with a stuffed Simba from The Lion King as my toy. That will be quite important later. Our convertible eased onto the freeway, and for the most part, it was a pleasant and uneventful ride. I remember the loud noise of the cars and the hot wind. I first became aware of the truck as it laid on its horn behind us. I turned in my seat to see a huge gray monster of a truck tailgating us ridiculously close. As soon as it was safe, my mom changed into the slow lane on the right of the freeway, assuming he would just pass us. He pulled level to our car though, rolled down his windows, and began screaming at us to pull over in the middle of the desert on the freeway. My mom ignored him and told us to just do the same. I remember feeling very uneasy though, less scared than annoyed. Kinda like, dude, come on, this is my day to have fun, just leave us alone. Besides, I wasn't really a stranger to angry shouting men, even at that age. Unfortunate, but true. I think the lack of reaction really irritated the man though, or maybe this was his plan the entire time. He swiftly pulled into our lane and essentially forced us off the road onto the shoulder. My mom did her best to maintain control of the car and not make contact with the other vehicle, but that was pretty much impossible in this situation. The unmistakable crunch of metal rings out, and both vehicles come to a stop, again on the side of a desert freeway. Not exactly anyone around to help out or places to run away to. My mom checks me to see if I'm okay and remains in her seat. Now, if I were her, I don't know if I would have waited to confront this man with a child in my car after that stunt. However, my ma has and always will be the tough-as-nails type of gal who isn't afraid of anything, especially when she feels she's been wronged. And of course, she had no idea what was to happen next. In a flash of anger and cursing, the man was at the driver's side door, screaming about the damage to his car, how it was caused because of food trash that had been flying out of the convertible, landing on his front window and blocking the view. He started demanding compensation, that my mom get out of the car and come look at his. Of course, my mom refused to get out of the car. She pointed to a call box a fair distance away and said it was best to call the cops and let them handle this. I guess it wasn't the answer the angry man wanted. In one fluid movement, the man grabbed the back of my mother's head and once, twice, 3 times smashed it into the steering wheel, rendering her unconscious. Lifting her like a sack of potatoes, he dropped her on the side of the road and jumped into the driver's seat, keys still in the ignition. He started the car up. Now, I hadn't even reacted yet. I think I was in an absolute state of shock. It wasn't until I felt the car start moving and getting back on the road that I registered what had happened. And what had hit me? It hit me hard. I went ballistic. I was no longer just annoyed with this man. I was now furious for what he'd done to my mom. I remembered that I held my stuffed Simba by the tail as I climbed out of my seat and began screaming while whipping the man in the face, blinding him. I'll always remember I was shouting something like, "You're the meanest man in the whole world." I crawled and kicked and gave no care to what was going to happen to me. I just knew that this man was going to pay. As you can imagine, this led to a couple of things happening. First, I made it impossible to drive that car safely. He ended up crashing into another shoulder. Second, by this time people had started to see a combination of a woman lying on the shoulder and a convertible with a Tasmanian devil of a 5-year-old beating up some creeper. They began to alert authorities. I don't remember too much after that. I remember the cops coming and sitting in the back of a police cruiser. They gave me a teddy bear and asked me a lot of questions, and my grandma picked me up. My mom went to the hospital. Thankfully, she didn't have any major damage, just a busted nose and some whiplash. We never did make it to my cousin's party, and I never saw that white convertible again either. I'll always be thankful though for my main man Simba having my back through all that bullshit. I don't know what the man's intentions were. Looking back and knowing the area we lived in, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if drugs played a major part in all of this. When I was 9, maybe 10, my father and I were driving through some rural county areas when his car ran out of gas. He was aiming to get to a nearby gas station. an old middle-of-nowhere style mart that we would stop in to get pickled eggs and sweet tea on these country drives. It was hot and I was extremely annoyed, ready to just go home and watch TV. He popped out of the truck and got his gas canister. We planned to walk the mile down the road to fill up. After a couple of minutes of walking though, I started complaining, as children tend to do. I got sand spurs in my laces. I'm sweating, I'm bored. My father, being the kooky guy he was, threw his thumb out deciding we should catch a ride. A couple of folks just passed us right by. Honestly, I don't blame them. He was rocking a Charles Manson style look back then, and who hitchhikes in 2007 anyway? Finally though, a beat-up minivan pulled over. In it was a middle-aged couple and 3 kids. Think country church types. Very ordinary-looking folks, if not a little granola with spaced-out energy. The kids were younger than me. I remember rolling my eyes and thinking, ew, snotty boys. The woman asked my dad if everything was okay. He explained the situation, and sweet as pie, she suggested, we can go on and grab it for you. Your girl can ride along with us to get in the AC. The middle seat of the minivan had 2 open seats. My dad thanked them and asked if we could both climb in. That's when the couple's energy changed, though. They insisted there was only space for a little girl like me. Come on, climb in. My intuition was saying no way, and my dad, though open to hitchhiking and getting us into another random trouble on the usual, seemed to have a similar wariness in this situation. He thanked them and offered that we wait in his truck in the AC while they went to do the run. Now the couple was talking only to me though, a mix of sweet and commanding. It'll only take a minute. We can get you a soda at the gas station. Come on, get in. My father though said, my baby's sticking with me. He started looking down the highway for another ride. When he peered out at the road, in that split second a man stepped out of the passenger seat and scooped me up by my armpits. The woman shoved a picture book into my hands, cooing, look, we'll have fun. Not taking in the full situation, I remember feeling annoyed at being babied. I felt like I had to be polite though, because in the South you're supposed to respect your elders no matter what. The man was about to slide the door closed. The next part happened so fast. My dad pushed past him and yanked me out. Meanwhile, she shifted immediately into drive as the man got back into his seat. They sped off, the side door still wide open. Between the velocity of an angry protective dad and a lurching vehicle, I landed in the ditch, unharmed but shaken up. I followed my dad back to the car in silence. He called a friend and we waited until they showed up to work out the gas situation. Years later, I wonder about this couple's intentions still. It's very possible they saw a kind of rough-around-the-edges man and a young girl and thought they had to help me. But mind you, I'm his spitting image, so visually obviously his child, and I was showing no signs of distress besides some attitude. They had no good reason not to drive him along too, or to just do the gas run on their own and bring it back if they were so good-natured. I was always taught stranger danger when I was younger, but I never expected it to happen with a couple that had kids with them. I still don't know what to make of it, honestly. I never saw them again, either. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide you like my content enough to subscribe, please be sure to hit the bell button right next to the subscribe button and turn notifications to all so you can be notified of every video I post in the future. If you don't feel like doing that though, I post a video nearly every day, so you can just come back every now and then and check up on what you missed. If you guys have any criticisms on what I can do better or any feedback on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I always enjoy reading all the comments and I try to give them hearts and respond when I can. If you guys would like to reach me for any reason, or you would like to send in a story to be read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You'll find a link to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, I also run 2 other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, where I do true crime videos and dark documentaries respectively. If that kind of content sounds interesting to you, why not go ahead and check it out and see if it is for you. Aside from that though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.
One of the biggest mistakes that I can remember making as a college student was spending all the money that I was supposed to use for a bus ticket back home on various other things throughout the semester. That was because when the time came for me to go home, I didn't have any way to afford the bus ticket. I couldn't ask my parents to send me the money either because this was back in 2004 when there was no Venmo or other cash transfer apps. At the time, it felt like my only option was to attempt to hitchhike home and hope that someone took pity on me as I carried my bags. To my surprise, I only had to walk about 3 miles before I was able to successfully flag someone down. A green Subaru Outback pulled up on the side of the road just ahead of me, so I quickly made my way over to the passenger window and leaned down to introduce myself. The driver appeared to be by himself, and he even looked like he was relatively close to my age. I explained my situation to him and asked if there was any chance that he was passing through or near Poughkeepsie because I lived just outside the city. And thankfully the man, who introduced himself as Adam, was happy to help. I loaded my bags into the back seat of his car before hopping into the passenger seat and taking off. The 2 of us made small talk, and according to Adam, he had just graduated from the same school I had been attending, so we bonded a bit over that. But at the end of the day, he was still a stranger. I didn't really know anything about him, so I kept my guard up for the entirety of the drive, which was supposed to be around 2 hours. Things changed a bit though when we were about 45 minutes from Poughkeepsie and Adam asked me for my address. Now my mind was telling me that he probably just wanted it to put it in the GPS to find the fastest route to my house, but my gut was telling me to be wary. I tried to explain to Adam that he could just drop me off at one of the Wendy's in the city and I would have my family pick me up from there after using their phone. I honestly didn't expect him to get upset, but for some reason, Adam began to raise his voice and asked me why I didn't want him to drop me off at my house. I didn't know what to say to him because I didn't want to upset him any more than I already unintentionally had done. But when I went to answer him, I noticed that he'd begun pulling over to the side of the road. I asked him if he wanted me to get out of the car because I kind of wanted to do that anyway. I was very uncomfortable. He told me that he didn't want that to happen, and he just wanted me to explain why I didn't trust him. Again, this was really odd seeing how I just met him, so I didn't quite know what to say. That was when his face began to get red, and I could see the anger in his eyes. I reached for the door handle, but he reacted by quickly locking the doors. Thankfully, the car had locks that I could pull upward to unlock, so I ripped the lock up and threw the door open before running out of the car. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that I had to get out of there, so I ran from the side of the road and into the woods, leaving my belongings in Adam's car. I heard him yelling behind me. He was screaming that he was going to find me, but after that, I didn't see any sign of him. I hid in the woods for an hour, and by that time, it had begun to get dark. I had to figure out how to get home, and I figured my best bet might be to head back to the road. And thankfully, by the time I got there, Adam's car was gone. I started walking down the road, and after a while, I saw a gas station that allowed me to use its phone. I called the police as well as my parents, who ended up asking my neighbor to borrow their car and come pick me up. The police didn't know what to make of the situation aside from the fact that I was now missing most of my belongings. But all they could say was, that's the danger of hitchhiking. Growing up, you're always told that you shouldn't pick up strangers off the side of the road, and I used to always think that was a jaded way to look at the world. Too bad I had to learn the hard way that sometimes it's alright to be a little jaded. You see, it was about 4 years ago. I was hanging out at the mall with my friend Kieran, and I was the one who had driven us there. It was probably around 4 in the afternoon when we decided to head back to his house to hang out for a few hours. At least, that was the plan. On our way home, as we were driving along the highway, I noticed that someone was walking alongside of it, and it looked like they were only wearing a t-shirt, and it was in the middle of January, so it was really cold. I felt bad for the guy and asked Kieran if he was alright with me stopping and seeing if the guy needed help, and he was fine with it. I pulled off to the side of the road and waited for the guy to walk up to the window, and right away I could tell that he was freezing. I asked him if he needed a ride into town, and he was very grateful about it. He quickly hopped into the back seat and explained that he was homeless and just looking for a ride to his friend's house. We began heading down the road, and the man just continued to thank us. It was really cool at first. That was until we had to stop for gas. I let him know that I needed to fill the tank real quick, and again he started thanking us for picking him up and said he was glad to have friends again. I thought that was odd, but hey, if he needed a friend, I would have been there. But things got weird. When I asked him if he wanted anything from the gas station and he said no, but then made a really odd joke. He said something along the lines of, "I can't offer you any money, but I can rob this place for you." Kieran and I looked at each other and sort of forced out a chuckle and then tried to brush the comment off. I got gas and sodas for all of us and then hit the road again. I asked the man where he needed us to drop him off, and I don't know exactly what set him off, but he began screaming at us. He began saying that he thought we liked him and that he was just joking about robbing the store, which once again took us off guard because I genuinely didn't mean anything. I tried to explain that he needed to be dropped off at his friend's place, and I just wanted to know where to take him. The man started punching the back seat next to him and then said something along the lines of, "I can't believe you're kicking me out." Kieran and I were really on edge at that point, and that was when Kieran told me to pull over. He then looked back at the man and asked him very kindly to get out of the car, and before either of us could react, the man swung a box cutter at Kieran's face. Kieran pulled his face back, and I could see that he had gotten sliced across the nose and right under his eye. I screamed for Kieran to run as I pulled the keys out of the car's ignition. We both ran out of the car as fast as we could and began running down the road. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and I began dialing 911. I looked over to see Kieran clutching his face as blood poured down it. I spoke to the dispatcher about what had happened, and they sent an officer to meet us down the road from my car, as well as an ambulance for Kieran. By the time the officer took me back to my car, the man was already gone, and the entire interior of my car was cut up and destroyed. My glove box was empty, including all of the paperwork for the vehicle and insurance. I ended up getting my car towed and had to pay almost $3,000 to have everything all fixed up inside, and Kieran ended up needing to get 13 stitches in his face. I hate being this way, but I will never pick up another hitchhiker in my life. I have learned my lesson. If there's one thing that I learned by being in a relationship is that you should never argue. But if you're going to have a dispute, you definitely should wait until you are home and not in the car. But you know what they say, hindsight is 20/20. I was 19 years old and I was driving home from a concert that was about 3 hours from my house. On the way home, my girlfriend was driving and I forgot what happened, but we got into an argument over something trivial. And after about 5 minutes of bickering, she did something that to this day I don't blame her for. I was acting like a jerk. So she kicked me out of the car and told me to call someone to pick me up. I didn't argue and ended up getting out of the car, and without me even being able to say anything, she took off. I grabbed my phone out to call a taxi, but it was just my luck that the battery had died at the show. My only option at that point was to start walking and hope that I could find a ride or at least a phone that I could use. It only took me about 5 minutes of walking before I noticed a large SUV pulling up alongside me as I walked along the sidewalk. Sitting in the driver's seat was a slightly older guy who asked me if I needed any help. I responded by asking if I could use his phone, but sadly he claimed not to have one. Instead, he offered to give me a ride to a diner up the road that would let me use their phone, and against my better judgment, I hopped inside. We began making our way down the road, and at first, he was asking me normal questions like where I'm from, what I was doing in the area, and things of that sort. He even claimed to like 311, the band we went to see in concert, and all in all, he seemed like a pretty cool guy. That was until he started asking me about my personal belongings. It started off simple. He complimented the hoodie I was wearing, saying it looked nice, and asked me where I got it so he could pick one up. But then he said that it looked expensive. I started to become a bit uneasy at the comment, but tried to just brush it off. He then looked over at me and down at the watch that was on my wrist, which I tried to cover up with my sleeve, but it was too late. "That's a nice watch too," he said to me before claiming that I probably had some money. I knew right away that I was in the wrong situation and asked the man if he could pull over and that I would walk the rest of the way, but he told me that he couldn't do that yet. When I asked him what he meant by yet, he proceeded to pull a small handgun out from the driver's side door and pointed it toward me. It was clear that I wasn't going to get out of the car without giving him whatever it was that he wanted. He continued to drive around slowly as I handed him my dead phone, my wallet, the watch, my sweatshirt, and my sneakers. He then shoved the gun in my face and told me that if I called the police, he was going to find me. I was sweating as I could see his finger resting on the trigger of the gun. I nodded in response to everything that he had said, and as soon as he pulled over, I jumped out of the car and began running in the opposite direction. I ran as fast as I could to the closest parking lot that had cars in it and ran inside asking for help. I explained that I had just gotten robbed, and the owner of the convenience store that I ran into called the police for me and then allowed me to call my girlfriend, who quickly came and picked me back up.